You've long argued that automation and not trade was really the driver behind the loss of US manufacturing jobs. So given this recent push to bring manufacturing back, how feasible is it to reshore manufacturing?
It's very difficult to reshore manufacturing, but you would need a few things to take a shot at it. I mean, the main thing you have to do is put yourself in the shoes of a CEO or management team of a large company that's trying to figure out where they want to build a manufacturing plant. And the way Trump has rolled out these tariffs has not been productive at all, in that if you're going to make a decision to reshore or build your supply chain here, that's not an overnight or quick decision. You're looking at 2 to 3 years before your new factory might have a chance of being productive and online. And so then what's the payback period on that factory? It's going to be an additional, let's call it 5 to 10 years. So you need visibility of closer to 6 to 15 years to be able to make an intelligent manufacturing decision. And does anyone have any confidence that the tariffs are going to be here in 6 months, let alone 6 years? So when I was talking to various CEOs, they say, look, I don't have any confidence. And so when they make a decision, what you're not seeing is investment in reshoring among American firms. What you're seeing is disinvesting. And this is exacerbated by the fact that these tariffs don't happen in a vacuum, that if we declare tariffs on China, then China declares tariffs on us, and then American manufacturers, if anything, end up cutting back. And you're seeing that out of various firms where they're announcing, whether it's Mack Truck or other manufacturers saying, hey guys, there's going to be less demand for our stuff, so we're not going to need as many workers. So if your goal is to create manufacturing employment, you have to know that you can't do something unilaterally because it ends up provoking a response.
And to that point, is it the tariffs that are the problem, or is it a combination of the tariffs and the way in which they're delivered and this idea of we don't know if it's going to be paused, reimposed, because there's been a lot of back and forth, of course. Or is it truly is part of it the fundamental economic policy of a tariff, not bringing investment here?
So if it were me and I was trying, so the first thing you do is you acknowledge that, look, if we could go back in time, would you have adopted this approach in terms of allowing the outsourcing of manufacturing so thoroughly to places like China? And you probably wouldn't. So you have to acknowledge that mistakes were made that have gutted many communities in the Midwest and the South in particular. The problem, though, is that those manufacturing workers from 25, 30 years ago aren't still there. The capacity is not still there. Communities have largely moved on. And so then when you try to reverse this trend, it has to be done very, very thoughtfully and deliberately. The second thing, what you would do is you would go hand in hand with various CEOs and you would say to them, okay, what would it take for you to build this manufacturing plant here? And then they would say what a version of what I just said is, which is visibility of 6 to 15 years and a lot of other things. And so then you could start to take steps in that direction. What you wouldn't do is you wouldn't do a blanket tariff. What you might do is you might say, okay, I'm sitting with this firm, and you could like choose an industry and say, what we're going to do is we're going to apply tariffs specifically on this industry. What you wouldn't do is you wouldn't do a blanket tariff and then say everyone will figure it out. You would go to a specific sector or a number of companies and you would say, okay, guys, we want you to rebuild manufacturing capacity. So we're going to put tariffs on your competitors for an extended period of time, and then you can make these investments. And I wouldn't actually make the move unless you already had the manufacturing commitments in hand, where you could like actually make that connection. There are so many problems with the way this is being rolled out right now. And certainly globalization has been a major factor in this, but also automation and technology have been speeding up. You can argue about the proportion of automation versus globalization and how we ended up losing 4 to 5 million manufacturing jobs over an extended period of time, and that had massive negative effects on various communities. But if you go to factories in other countries, you'll find a mix. Labor is much cheaper in these other countries, so it's more manageable for them to say, look, let's just have people. By the way, if you go to a Chinese factory, I mean, they work 6, 7 days a week around the clock in a way that you might find unappealing in other societies that have things like rules and laws around work weeks, shall we say. And so if you do reshore here, you're going to see factories that are filled wall to wall with robot arms and automation, as opposed to thousands of workers. Maybe you end up with dozens of high-skilled technicians with laptops overseeing your robo factory. But that would be the natural result if a company were to build a facility.
Yeah, can you kind of pull that out a little more? Because I think it's really hard for a lot of Americans to sort of picture what are factories today and like what are these jobs that we're trying to bring back? Because as you've long warned about automation, so the factory's not the same factory that it's been decades ago, of course. So like who would be filling these jobs and like what even are the factory jobs that would bring manufacturing back? Like what would that even be?
Yeah, so I talked to someone who ran a very large company supply chain, and they said that the proportion of both college graduates and even master's or graduate level employees has gone up and up. Where if you imagine manufacturing employee, you think high school grads, like maybe a little bit of vocational training. But as these factories have become more and more sophisticated and automated, you have a different employee base, and it's smaller, by the way. It's a lot smaller. You do end up with technicians walking around with laptops monitoring equipment, as opposed to a burly human doing repetitive assembly. Now, there is a blend, and it depends upon the industry. But the higher the economic value, the more likely it is to be automated. As soon as the numbers get big enough, you start looking up and saying, why am I closing 8 hours a day, or why am I closing one day a week? And then your incentives to automate go up and up. So what would happen is the industries that are most likely to need human workers tend to be the dirtiest, the least appealing, the cheapest, really. And a lot of them, imagine, for example, like right now, there are still many workers picking fields. Now, a lot of those workers tend not to be Americans, tend to be migrants, which ends up being a whole other ball of wax. But in those instances, it still makes sense to use humans, at least for the time being, because the labor is cheap and the nature of the work is a little bit trickier to automate.
And is there, in your opinion, a cost that could come to this sort of extreme dependence or reliance on technology and automation in these factories? Like, is this going to change the future of labor? Is this going to change education or training, or is this going to consume a ton of energy? Like, are there other systematic changes that will come from this if we're successfully able to bring and reshore manufacturing here, and it does look like this, and it is this automated sort of process? What is sort of like the cost of that societally?
Well, one of the things that's driving desire to reshore elements of the supply chain is that some of the products in question might have national security implications. For example, some of the chips and semiconductors, you can't operate various things without it. And right now, a lot of those chips are manufactured in Taiwan, which might be subject to an attack from China. And so the US is looking around saying, okay, we can't have China be able to cut off a supply chain of things that we're going to need. So let's try and make those products here in the US. The trend you're describing, which is, hey, what happens when you start to automate a bunch of factories? What happens to the labor force? What happens to towns? That all has been happening for quite some time. And we still have something of a 60s or 70s era image of factories in our minds. But when you go into one of these factories, again, it's robot arms as far as the eye can see. I was just talking to a person who's investing in humanoid robots that it used to be that they had to recharge, but what they've done is they've turned the floor into a battery, and so they never have to recharge, and they cost maybe $250,000 per unit, but then they never rest. They don't need anything, and they might have a shelf life of 10 years, which means you're paying $25,000 a year for a worker that never has to stop or rest and has no needs and whatnot. And so this investor shrugged and thought like, well, geez, like, what future does lie ahead for the average American worker who used to be in that kind of role?
You touched on this a little bit during your presidential campaign about sort of the almost demise of some of these manufacturing towns where there's, high levels of opioid use and suicide. And so now, do you have any thoughts of like what happens when you reinvigorate some of these towns? If it is going to be where manufacturing goes, I guess it's not really clear where geographically or regionally this might be reinvested, but if it does go back into those same areas, do you have any sort of like understanding of what that might do?
Well, yeah, if you build a new facility, even though it might not employ thousands and thousands of workers, it's certainly going to employ, let's say, hundreds. And you do need infrastructure connecting to that factory. You probably have many transports coming and going, and then the truckers might need to get out and have a meal. So there are a lot of um, uh, positive economic effects of having one of these facilities in your town. It's just not going to be as dramatic and widespread as you might hope. And by the way, you already see this, and that there are cities and states that compete for various projects, and the projections for each project are always very, very high. And then when you actually dig in, it's like, oh, it turns out they didn't need quite as many people, or the effect wasn't quite as lasting as you'd hope. So that I think is a realistic expectation. I'm not against trying to build more things in America. It'd be great. I think that the way that this is being approached is going to cause much more harm than good. I think like the Trump tariffs are much more likely to initiate a recession, which is going to result in a lot of people losing their jobs, including and especially manufacturing workers. You're in many ways taking a sledgehammer to problem that requires more of a scalpel. And That seems very Trump-y in my opinion. Um, uh, but these things are the products of decisions that get made in company offices over like a multi-year period.
Right. And can you just explain a little bit more as to why this actually might lead to more manufacturer employees being laid off or terminated?
Well, certainly. So the tariffs, in my view, will wind up in layoffs because existing manufacturers are going to have tougher pricing on all of their components, and then tougher markets when they try and sell if they're selling abroad. So their margins will be lower. And so they're going to look around and say, geez, I don't have as much business. I'm not making as much money. I guess I have to fire some people. And we're already seeing that. So the tariffs as a reindustrialization policy are really boneheaded and destructive.
And I guess in an ideal world, if the US was able to somehow reshore this manufacturing, what do you think would be the process to do that? Is it through tax breaks? Is it through limited tariff or targeted tariffs and just the sectoral aspect that you were talking about earlier? Or are there
Yeah, what you do is so you need to, because the problem is you can't have magical thinking about this. You need actual companies willing to make actual commitments over a multi-year period to say, look, we are going to build the same manufacturing plant in Ohio or Michigan or Arizona or wherever it is. And then if you have that confidence, then you can say to them, okay, what do you need? What's the time frame? And then you look at a firm that's similar to that firm and say, ooh, maybe I can build a bit of an industry consortium. And then you target tariffs and give them more visibility. That to me could work. And that's something that you might not be against. Instead, they have the opposite approach, which is a blanket tariff, and then they go around exempting, electronics and some other industries because they're afraid of prices spiking and consumers getting pissed off. And someone got to them and was like, "Look, man, you can't make cell phones cost $3,000 or whatever it's going to be." So then they exempted that. But then you get the worst of all worlds, which is, hey, I've put out this blanket tariff that's going to depress economic activity and increase layoffs at the margins, and then I'm going to exempt various industries. Like you do the opposite. What you do is you target certain industries in concert with corporate policies.
And I guess since you were ahead of the curve on automation years ago, do you have any predictions now where we are in terms of automation for the next I guess presidency, sort of like at the end of it? Where do you think we're going to stand in terms of automation?
Yeah, so AI now is displacing many white collar workers. About 44% of American jobs are either repetitive cognitive or repetitive manual. So we've been talking primarily about manufacturing environments, but if you go into the average company office or HQ, customer service employees are going to be losing their jobs. Administrative employees are going to be losing their jobs. A lot of people are going to go the same way of bookkeepers and travel agents. And I know people who are starting companies and they're just not hiring people for certain roles that they might have even a few years ago because you have a subscription service in AI. Someone told me that they used to have 6 designers and they fired them all because they just use AI for that. AI is going to rip through a lot of white collar environments, and that's already happening. The problem is that our current political leadership is disconnected from those stories. I mean, so if you take a big step back for a minute, we're now living through the results of our blasting many manufacturing communities to smithereens because our political system didn't really care about those communities. AI is now going to decimate jobs for white collar workers and college graduates. And I ask you, if that were to happen, what would be the political response? It's like our political system doesn't care about those communities either, because of the way our system is designed. So you're looking at AI as a massive force for automation of labor and a dysfunctional political system that will not respond to it in a meaningful way.